The dining room was exactly as it had been for the past 20 years. The mahogany table that was somehow always too polished. The cream-colored wallpaper with the subtle damask pattern my mother had chosen in 2003. The chandelier, not a particularly impressive one, but one that my mother dusted with religious fervor every Saturday. Everything in this room spoke to a certain kind of life, a life of careful maintenance, a life of appearances. I was sitting at that table, cutting into my mother's pot roast, which I'll admit was actually excellent, when she said it. "You know, I worry about you," my mother said, setting down her fork with the kind of theatrical precision that suggested this was about to be a performance. "You're 34 years old and you're still, well, I don't know how to say this tactfully." I looked up from my plate. My father was reading the newspaper at the table, which was something he'd done for decades despite my mother's periodic complaints that it was rude. My younger brother Jason was on his phone, not even pretending to engage with the family dinner ritual. "Still what, Mom?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "A failure," she said flatly. "You're a failure, Sarah. I don't mean to be harsh, but someone needs to say it. You're living paycheck to paycheck. You're not married. You're not giving me grandchildren. You're just existing. Like you're waiting for something to happen instead of making it happen." The words landed like stones in still water. I set down my fork and took a sip of water. I could feel my father's newspaper dip slightly. He was listening, even though he was pretending not to. "You have that job at the nonprofit," my mother continued, really getting going now, "which barely pays anything. You're renting an apartment in a questionable neighborhood. You drive a car that's held together with hope and duct tape. Your brother is married with a house. He's actually accomplishing things, and you're just..." "Just what, Mom?" I asked, and I could hear the coldness in my own voice. "Wasting your potential, wasting your life, throwing away the opportunities I gave you." That's when I did something I rarely did. I asked a clarifying question. "Then who's been paying your bill?" There was a pause. My mother looked at me like I'd spoken in Mandarin. "What do you mean, who's been paying my bill? We pay our own bills, Sarah. That's what adults do." "Exactly," I said quietly. "That's what adults do, and I've been doing that for the past 12 years. My own bills, your country club membership, your car lease, your medical insurance, your dental insurance, your property taxes. Those bills, Mom, I've been paying your bills." My father's newspaper dropped. My brother looked up from his phone. There was a quality of shock in the room that was almost palpable. "That's ridiculous," my mother said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "Your father and I are financially independent. We have savings." "You do," I said. "You have savings that I've been filling for 12 years, ever since Dad's heart attack, ever since his disability didn't quite cover what you needed, ever since your investments underperformed and you started needing help." My mother's face cycled through several colors. "You're being manipulative," she said, which was classic my mother. When cornered, she would reframe the conversation. "You're trying to make me feel guilty for having concerns about your life." "I'm not trying to make you feel anything," I said. "I'm just answering your question about who's been paying the bills. The answer is me. For 12 years, the answer has been me." To understand how I ended up at that dinner table, defending myself against accusations of failure while secretly bankrolling my parents' lifestyle, I need to go back to the beginning. Or at least, to the moment when everything started to change. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old. I work as the development director for a nonprofit called Community Bridges that focuses on housing assistance for people experiencing homelessness. It's not a lucrative job. I make about $68,000 a year, which in most places would be solidly middle class. In most places, it would be enough to live on, save a little, have a life. But I don't live in most places. I live in Connecticut, in the town of Easton, which is the kind of place where modest homes cost $800,000 and people drive Range Rovers to yoga class. I work there. I grew up there. And for reasons that I'm still not entirely clear on, I never left. My childhood was what I would call comfortable. Not wealthy. My parents would have bristled at that description, but comfortable. My father, Robert, was a surgeon. Not quite as prestigious as a cardiac surgeon, but close. He was an orthopedic surgeon, and he did very well. My mother, Caroline, was a former therapist who'd stopped working when my brother Jason was born and had never gone back. She devoted herself to volunteer work and the maintenance of our home's appearance. I was the older child by 4 years. I was supposed to be the high achiever, the one who followed in my father's footsteps. I was supposed to go to an Ivy League school, become a doctor or lawyer, marry someone from a good family, and perpetuate the cycle. Instead, I went to UConn, a perfectly respectable state school, but not what my mother had hoped for, studied social work, and became increasingly interested in community development and housing policy. By the time I graduated at 22, I was certain that I wanted to work in the nonprofit sector, helping people who were actually struggling. My mother had been devastated. "But you're so smart," she'd said at my graduation. "Why would you throw away your intelligence on that kind of work? You could be making real money." "Real money isn't the point," I'd replied. "It's always the point," she'd said, and I think she might have actually believed that. I'd moved into my first apartment in Hartford when I was 23. It was a small place in a not great neighborhood, but it was mine. I'd worked entry-level jobs while I figured out the nonprofit world. I'd taken some risks. I'd failed at some things. I'd succeeded at others. By the time I was 26, I'd landed at Community Bridges, and I'd been working my way up ever since. My father's heart attack happened when I was 26. It wasn't a massive one. He was fortunate in that. The doctors said his prognosis was good with proper medication and lifestyle changes, but it had scared him. It had scared all of us. The aftermath was complicated. My father recovered, but he couldn't work quite as hard as he had before. He was supposed to retire at 65, but life happens and his retirement became less certain. The market crashed. His investments didn't perform as well as he'd hoped. My mother, who'd never worked after I was born, was facing the possibility that they might not have quite as much money as they'd assumed. This is where I came in. It was a Sunday dinner, much like the one that happened this evening about 12 years ago. I was living in an apartment in Hartford, working at a smaller nonprofit making about $35,000 a year. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I was frugal. I was careful. I was okay. My parents had asked me to come home for dinner. My mother had made pot roast, the same pot roast she'd made every Sunday for the past 30 years. My father was reading the newspaper. Everything was normal. Except it wasn't. "We need to talk to you about something," my father said, which is never the opening line you want to hear at a family dinner. My mother looked at him, nodded, and then looked at me with an expression that I now recognize as shame, but which at the time I interpreted as something else. "Your father and I have been reviewing our financial situation," my mother began carefully, "and we've realized that we may not have as much saved as we thought we did." "Okay," I said cautiously. "We were wondering if you'd be willing to help out," my father said. "Just temporarily, just until we can get things back on track." "Help out how?" I asked. "We have some bills that are coming due. Medical expenses from my recovery, some investments that underperformed. We're looking at maybe needing $500 a month for the next year or so, just to smooth things out." $500 a month. It was the difference between comfortable and tight in my budget, but it was doable. And they were my parents. They'd helped me through college. They'd supported me when I was figuring out my career. It seemed like the kind of thing you just did. Yeah, okay, I said. I can do that. My mother looked relieved. My father looked grateful. Everything seemed fine. Except, of course, it wasn't fine. Because a year passed and the temporary help didn't end. It became 2 years, then 3. The 500 a month became 700, then 1,000, then 1,500. By year 5, I was sending my parents $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year, while making less than $70,000 total. And I'd never told anyone. The thing about giving money to family is that it's supposed to be this big, noble thing. It's supposed to be celebrated. Oh, you're so generous. You're such a good daughter. Your parents are so lucky. But when you're keeping it secret, when you're not telling your friends, when you're not even telling yourself out loud, it becomes something else. It becomes shame. It becomes resentment. It becomes a lie you're living. I didn't tell my friends because how would I explain it? Hey, I'm giving my parents $2,000 a month because they're bad with money and they'll judge me mercilessly if I say no. That's not a conversation you want to have. It makes you sound pathetic. It makes your parents sound entitled. It makes you sound like you've lost your mind. I didn't tell my coworkers because I work in nonprofit housing assistance. My entire job is based on the idea that people should be self-sufficient, that they should have agency over their financial lives. How could I tell people that I was subsidizing my parents' country club membership, which they never explicitly asked me to fund, but which they wouldn't have been able to afford without my help? I didn't tell my brother Jason because he'd always been the golden child, the one who did everything right. He was married at 28. He had a house. He had 2 kids. He worked in finance and made significant money. Telling him that I was secretly funding our parents' lifestyle would have felt like admitting that I was the foolish one, the one who couldn't say no. So I said nothing. I just kept sending the money. Every month, I'd log into my bank account and transfer the funds. $24,000 a year, which was approximately 35% of my gross income, was being sent to my parents. I adjusted my life accordingly. I didn't go out much. I didn't buy nice things. I didn't date because dating required money for restaurants and activities and all the things that came with building a relationship. I drove my 10-year-old car. I rented a small apartment. I made my own coffee instead of going to Starbucks. I did all the things that financially responsible people do. And I did it all while feeling like I was suffocating. By year 10 of sending money to my parents, I was a different person than I'd been at 26. I was more bitter, more cynical, more angry at the world and my place in it. At work, I was hearing stories from people who were genuinely in crisis. People who'd lost their jobs through no fault of their own. People whose medical emergencies had bankrupted them. People who were one emergency away from homelessness. And I was helping them navigate systems that had failed them. And every month, I was sending money to my parents so they could maintain a lifestyle that included a country club membership and regular dinners at restaurants and vacations to the Outer Banks. The cognitive dissonance was brutal. My therapist, yes, I eventually got a therapist because I needed to talk to someone, kept asking me why I didn't just stop. It's not that simple, I'd tell her. Why not? She'd ask. Because they're my parents. And does that mean you have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm? I didn't have a good answer to that. The truth was, I couldn't imagine just saying no. I couldn't imagine my mother's disappointment. I couldn't imagine my father's shame at not being able to provide for his wife the way he thought he should. I couldn't imagine the guilt that would follow if anything bad happened to them, because I'd refused to help. So I stayed trapped. I stayed quiet. I stayed angry. And I waited. I waited for something to change. I waited for my parents to figure things out. I waited for an inheritance that would solve their problems. I waited for something, anything, to make this situation different than it was. Nothing changed. It just kept going. Month after month, year after year, money flowing out of my account and into theirs. On the evening of that dinner, I'd had what I can only describe as a breakdown at work. I was in my office at Community Bridges, and I was reviewing our budget for the coming year. We were short on funding, as always. We'd recently had to cut a program that helped people transition from homelessness into permanent housing. 72 people were going to lose assistance because we didn't have enough money. 72 people. Real people with real lives and real struggles. And I had just written a check to my mother for her country club membership renewal. $2,000, because that was what she needed from me this month. Above and beyond the regular $2,000 I was already sending. That's when something broke in me. I sat at my desk and I cried. Real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep and primal. The kind that means something has shifted. I called my therapist. I can't do this anymore, I told her. Then don't, she said simply. It's not that simple. Sarah, it is. You're choosing to do this. You can choose to stop. But my parents. Your parents are adults. They have the ability to figure out their own finances. You taking on their financial burden is not actually helping them. It's just enabling their dependency. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time. I thought about the people in our programs. I thought about how much good I could do with an extra $24,000 a year. I thought about the vacations I'd never taken. I thought about the fact that I was 34 years old and I'd never been in a serious relationship because I was too busy funding my parents' lifestyle. That's when my mother called. Hi, honey, I was just calling to check in. Are you coming to dinner on Sunday? I'm making your favorite pot roast. And something in me just snapped. Yeah, I'll be there, I said. I drove to my parents' house on Sunday with my jaw clenched, so tight, I thought I might break my teeth. Their house was exactly as I remembered it. The beautiful Victorian in the heart of Easton, the one that had seemed like a castle when I was a child. The perfect landscaping, the perfect shutters, the perfect everything. My mother greeted me at the door with a hug that felt performative, like she was staging it for an invisible audience. Sweetheart, you look tired, she said. Are you taking care of yourself? I'm fine, Mom, I said. Dinner was ready. The pot roast was beautiful. My father was at the table, already reading the newspaper. Jason was on his phone. Everything was exactly as it always was. And I was going to change that. We made small talk for about 15 minutes. How was work? How was my apartment? Did I like the new shoes my mother had bought me? I hadn't been consulted about these shoes. My mother had simply shown up at my apartment with them and handed them to me. They were uncomfortable and in a style I would never wear, but I'd accepted them because that was what you did with gifts from family. Then my mother set down her fork and said, You know, I worry about you. And the rest of it poured out, the failure comment, the judgment about my life, the implication that I was wasting my potential. And then I'd asked, Then who's been paying your bills? The moment after I asked the question was absolutely silent, the kind of silence that stretches and becomes its own living thing. My father lowered his newspaper completely. My mother's face went very still. Jason actually put down his phone. Sarah, my mother said, and there was a warning in her voice. That's not appropriate dinner conversation. I wasn't aware there was a time limit on appropriate, I said. Is there a window when it's okay to discuss how I've been paying your bills for the past 12 years, or should I schedule that conversation for a different meal? My father set down his newspaper. When he spoke, his voice was very calm. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the money, I said. The $2,000 a month that I've been sending to you since your heart attack. $48,000 a year. I've been doing this for 12 years, which means I've given you approximately $576,000. I couldn't believe I'd done the math. I could feel my mother's face getting redder. You make it sound like you're doing something against your will, my mother said. We asked for help and you offered it. You didn't say no. I did try to say no. Twice. Do you remember? The first time I said I couldn't afford it anymore was 6 years ago. I was 38 years old and I was spending more money helping my parents than I was on myself. And you cried. You told me about your medical bills and your investment losses and how disappointed you'd be in me if I abandoned you. We never used the word abandoned, my mother said. No, you used the word disappointment, which is somehow worse, because I was already failing to meet your expectations in every other area of my life. I wasn't married, I wasn't making 6 figures, I wasn't giving you grandchildren. And suddenly, the only way I could actually be a good daughter was to bankroll your lifestyle. My father tried to intervene. Sarah, we appreciate everything you've done for us, but that's not fair. What's not fair, I interrupted, is that I've been spending the past 12 years of my life trying to help people who are actually struggling, while I'm silently drowning. What's not fair is that my mother just sat across this table and called me a failure, when the only thing keeping this house standing is my paycheck. What's not fair is that I can't be honest with my friends about why I'm still renting at 34, because it would make my family look bad. My brother Jason, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Mom, is this true? Have you been taking money from Sarah? We haven't been taking anything, my mother said, her voice sharp. Sarah has been helping us with some bills and we're grateful, but she's making it sound like we've been stealing from her or something. You've been stealing from her, Jason said quietly. Or at least she's been allowing you to steal from her. $2,000 a month, that's more than 30% of her salary. My mother looked at Jason like he'd betrayed her. I don't appreciate your tone. I don't appreciate what you're doing to my sister, Jason said. This was surprising to me. Jason and I weren't particularly close. We'd been distant for years, mostly because he'd been busy with his own life and I'd been too resentful to reach out. But apparently something about this moment was piercing through the distance. I think I'm going to leave, I said, standing up from the table. I'm going to leave and I'm going to stop sending money. As of next month, I'm done. My mother's face cycled through several expressions. Shock, anger, fear. You're being irrational, she said. You're upset. You need to think about this. I've thought about it, I said. I've thought about it for 12 years. I've thought about it every month when I transfer the money. I've thought about it when I've had to give up vacations and dadding and anything resembling a normal life. I've thought about it, and I'm done. Sarah, my father said, and there was something pleading in his voice. Please don't do this. You don't understand our situation. I understand perfectly, I said. I understand that you've been living beyond your means and I've been funding it. I understand that I've been allowing my own life to shrink so that you could maintain an appearance. I understand that I've been dishonest with everyone in my life about this situation. But I don't understand why you think it was okay. I don't understand why you thought it was okay to judge me for not being successful enough while I was literally paying for your country club membership. I grabbed my jacket. I'm leaving, I said. I'll send you notice about the money stopping. Give you a month to figure things out. I'm done. And I walked out. I didn't hear from my parents for 3 days. I'd half expected my mother to call immediately, to start the manipulation process, to try to convince me that I'd overreacted. But there was nothing. The silence was almost worse than yelling would have been. On the 4th day, My brother called me. "Hey," he said, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not knowing about this. For not being more present. I was so wrapped up in my own life that I didn't even realize what was happening." "It's not your responsibility to fix my problems," I said. "I know, but we're siblings. We're supposed to look out for each other, and I've been absent, I'm sorry." We talked for an hour. Really talked, for the first time in years. Jason told me about his own struggles, the pressure of trying to maintain the lifestyle his wife expected, the stress of trying to be the successful one in the family, the guilt he felt for not doing more to help our parents. "I feel like I was supposed to be the golden child," he said. "Like I was supposed to take care of them. But I was also supposed to be distant and independent. It was a contradiction I could never quite navigate." "Yeah," I said. "Welcome to our family." "Mom called me," Jason said. "After you left, she was hysterical. She said you were abandoning them, that you didn't understand your responsibility as a daughter." "Did you tell her to fuck off?" I asked hopefully. "I told her that you'd been doing her the favor, not the other way around. That she needed to apologize to you. I don't think she took it well." "Of course she didn't." "What are you going to do?" Jason asked. "I'm going to stop sending money. I'm going to stop feeling guilty about it. And I'm going to rebuild my life with the resources that are actually mine." "Good," Jason said. "I'm proud of you." I felt tears prickling at my eyes. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of me? When was the last time I'd believed it? The real confrontation came a week later when my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was not happy to see her. "You can't just cut us off," she said, standing in my living room without having been invited to sit down. "You have a responsibility to your family." "My responsibility to my family does not include funding their lifestyle," I said calmly. "It also doesn't include tolerating the way I'm treated when I do try to help." "You're punishing us because you're angry." "No," I said. "I'm protecting myself because I realized that what I was doing wasn't helping you. It was enabling you. Dr. Chen, my therapist, calls it codependency. You were dependent on my money, and I was dependent on feeling needed. It wasn't a healthy dynamic." My mother's face tightened. "You've been talking to someone about this, about your family." "Of course I have. I've been talking to a therapist for 2 years because I've been slowly suffocating under the weight of my own resentment. And the therapist has helped me understand that a lot of that resentment stems from the fact that I've been allowing myself to be used." "Used?" My mother's voice rose. "Is that what you think we've been doing, using you?" "What else would you call it?" I asked. "You had a heart attack, you had some financial setbacks. You asked me for help, I gave it. But then the help never ended. It just kept expanding. More money, more responsibility, more judgment. And whenever I tried to set a boundary, you made me feel guilty." "I never made you feel guilty," my mother said. "Mom, 6 years ago I told you I couldn't afford to keep sending money. And you cried for an hour and told me about your medical bills and how I was making you feel abandoned. That's guilt manipulation. That's using my love for you as a weapon." My mother sat down on my couch, like her legs had given out. "I didn't think of it that way," she said quietly. "That doesn't matter," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Whether you thought of it that way or not, that's what happened, and I'm not going to keep doing it." "What about your father?" my mother asked. "His disability income doesn't cover everything. If you stop sending money, he won't be able to afford his medications." That was the guilt trip to end all guilt trips. I took a breath. "Dad's disability income is supplemented by your Social Security. Combined, it's approximately $4,000 a month. Your house is paid off. Your car is paid off. Your utilities are probably around $300 a month. Your insurance is supplemented by Medicare. You can afford medications. What you can't afford is the country club membership, the restaurant dinners, and the vacations. Those are the things that will need to stop. Your father loves his country club, my mother said. And I love not living like I'm in constant crisis, I replied. Something has to give, and it's not going to be me anymore. My mother left after that conversation, without saying goodbye. The first month without sending money was strange. I had an extra $2,000 in my account. It felt unreal, like I was looking at a bank account that belonged to someone else. I didn't spend it immediately. I just let it sit there. I looked at it every day like it might disappear. My therapist encouraged me to think about what I actually wanted to do with this money. Not what I should do, what I actually wanted. I want to take a vacation, I said. I haven't taken a real vacation in probably 7 years. Then do that, Dr. Chen said. I want to decorate my apartment, I said. It's been furnished with the same IKEA stuff for 5 years. I want it to actually feel like a home. Then do that, she said. I want a date, I said. I've been avoiding relationships because I didn't have the time or the money or the emotional energy, but I think I want to try. Then do that, she said. It was revolutionary. The idea that I could simply make decisions about my own life based on what I wanted, rather than on obligation and guilt. The second month, I booked a trip. 1 week, Mexico, all-inclusive resort. I'd never done anything like that before. I felt almost irresponsible. But I was reclaiming my life, so a little irresponsibility seemed appropriate. I went to Mexico in August. I sat on a beach and read books. I went swimming. I got a massage. I ate food I didn't prepare myself. I didn't think about my parents once. When I got back, I felt different. I felt like I'd reclaimed something important. I felt like I was becoming myself again. By month 3 of not sending money, my parents were in crisis. My mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was different, smaller, like she'd shrunk. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something," she said. "Okay," I replied cautiously. "Your father and I are going to have to sell the house." I felt something shift in my chest. Despite everything, despite all the anger and resentment and legitimate grievances, I didn't want my parents to lose their house. "How long have you known this?" I asked. "We've been talking to a financial advisor for the past 2 months, ever since you stopped sending money. We looked at our actual situation, not the situation we thought we had, but the one we actually have. And the reality is that we can't maintain this house on our current income. We've been living beyond our means for years." "Years," I repeated. "I only sent money for 12. "Yes, but before that we were borrowing against the equity, taking out loans, making poor investment decisions. We thought the house would be worth more. We thought retirement would be different, but we were wrong. And now we're paying the price." I sat down on my couch. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, and I hated myself for asking because I could feel the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. "Nothing," my mother said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "There's nothing you can do. This is our responsibility. We're the ones who made bad decisions. We're the ones who refused to adjust our spending. And we're the ones who leaned on you when we should have been leaning on each other." I was shocked into silence. "Sarah, I want to apologize," my mother continued. "I want to apologize for calling you a failure. I want to apologize for making you feel like you needed to help us. I want to apologize for letting this situation go on for as long as it did. I was wrong. I'm sorry." It was the apology I'd never expected to hear. My father called me a few days later. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Really talk?" We arranged to meet for coffee. My father looked older than I remembered, smaller, like the weight of the past 12 years had been pressing down on him too. "I want you to understand something," he said, stirring his coffee carefully. "I didn't want to ask for your help. I wanted to provide for your mother. I wanted to be able to give her the life we'd built together, but I couldn't. And that failure, my failure, I couldn't face it. So I let your mother ask you instead. I let her be the one to carry the burden of that request." "Dad," I said, "you don't have to do this." "I do," he said, "because you need to know that this wasn't about you. It was about me, about my ego, about my inability to accept that my life hadn't gone the way I'd planned. Your mother's been in therapy for the past month, and the therapist helped us understand that I'd been using you to avoid facing my own failure." "It's not that simple," I said. "I know, but it's true. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't protect you from this situation. I'm sorry that I let your mother manipulate you. I'm sorry that I didn't have the courage to make hard decisions earlier." We sat in silence for a moment. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "About the house?" "We've found a condo about 20 minutes from here. It's affordable. It has 2 bedrooms, so if you or Jason want to visit, we have space for you. And more importantly, we can afford it on our actual income. It's not what we wanted, but it's what we need." "That sounds good," I said. "Your mother and I are also planning to downsize in other ways. We're giving up the country club membership. We're being more careful with our spending. We're adjusting our lifestyle to match our actual resources. It's not fun, but it's necessary. And honestly, I think we should have done it years ago." Jason came to visit me the following weekend. "I've been thinking about a lot of things," he said, sitting on my couch with a beer. "About us, about our family, about how I've been so focused on not being the one who needed help that I didn't notice that you were drowning." "You're not responsible for my choices," I said. "I know, but I could have been a better brother. I could have checked on you more often. I could have asked harder questions when I noticed you weren't coming to family events. I was too caught up in my own life to see what was happening to you." "What changed?" I asked. "I realized that all the stuff I was pursuing, the fancy house, the nice vacations, the status, was coming at the cost of actual relationships. I was so worried about being successful that I wasn't being present. And when this whole thing with you blew up, I realized that I didn't actually know my own sister." We ended up talking for hours, about our childhood, about the pressure to succeed, about the way our family had taught us that love was conditional on achievement, about all the things we'd never said to each other because we were too busy trying to prove we were fine. 3 months after my mother's call about selling the house, my parents moved to their new condo. I helped them pack, which was a strange experience. We were sorting through years of accumulated possessions, and my mother kept making decisions to get rid of things. "This china set," she said, holding up a beautiful set of plates. "We bought this thinking we'd use it for formal dinners. We never did. Someone else will enjoy it more than we ever did." She donated most of it to a local thrift store. "I'm tired," she said at one point, sitting on the stairs surrounded by boxes. "I'm tired of maintaining an image. I'm tired of pretending we have more than we do. I'm tired of being afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked. "Afraid of what people would think if they knew we were struggling. Afraid that our friends would judge us. Afraid that it meant something about us as people." "Does it?" I asked. "I'm starting to think it doesn't," my mother said. "I'm starting to think that struggling is just part of being human, and pretending you're not struggling is actually the weakness, not the other way around." My father was quieter during the move, but I could see him working through it. The weight lifting as he let go of the things he felt obligated to maintain. The condo was smaller than I'd expected, but it was bright and clean, and had a quality of peace that the house had never quite had. "This is nice," I said, looking around. "It is," my father agreed. "It's not what we thought we wanted, but it's what we need, and I think that's okay." 6 months after that dinner where everything changed, I was sitting in my apartment, which I'd finally decorated, filling it with things that made me happy, and I was thinking about how different everything was. I'd been on 3 dates. Nothing serious yet, but the fact that I was dating at all felt like a victory. I had the time and the emotional energy that I hadn't had when I was bankrolling my parents' lifestyle. I'd taken another vacation. This time, I went to Peru and did a hike to Machu Picchu. I came home with sunburned skin and stories and a sense of accomplishment. I'd made changes at work too. With the extra money I had, I'd been able to take on some additional projects. I'd written a grant that brought in an extra $100,000 for our housing program. We were able to help more people. My therapist had asked me how I felt about the situation with my parents. "I feel relief," I said, "and grief, and anger still sometimes, but mostly relief." "Have you forgiven them?" she asked. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," I said. "I understand them better now. I see that they were struggling and they didn't know how to ask for help in healthy ways. But that doesn't erase what they did. I don't have to forgive them in order to move forward. I just have to be clear about my boundaries." "And are you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "I am." Christmas came around, and my family was different. My mother had suggested that we do something low-key. No massive dinner, no performance. Just time together. We gathered at my parents' condo on Christmas Day. It was small and intimate in a way that the big house had never been. My parents, me, Jason, his wife, and their 2 kids. My mother had made a simple meal instead of the elaborate spread she used to prepare. My father was present in a way I hadn't seen in years. Jason and I kept sharing looks across the table, looks that said, "Remember when everything was different." "I want to say something," my mother announced as we were finishing dinner. "I want to acknowledge how difficult this year has been, how much has changed, and I want to apologize again, not just to Sarah, but to all of you, because what Sarah and I have been going through has affected all of us. It's affected how Jason thinks about his own family. It's affected his relationship with his kids, and I'm sorry for that." My father took her hand. "I think the most important thing we've learned this year," he said, "is that we're not as strong as we thought we were. We're not as successful or put together or independent as we believed. And you know what? That's okay. Being vulnerable is actually where the real strength is. Being honest about our struggles is more powerful than pretending everything's fine." "Can I say something?" Jason asked. We all nodded. "I'm grateful for what happened," Jason said. "I know that's a weird thing to say, but I'm grateful because it forced our family to be honest. It forced us to actually talk to each other instead of just performing at each other, and I think we're better for it." My mother looked at me. "Sarah, I know I've said this, but I want to say it again in front of everyone. I'm proud of you. Not because you're financially successful or because you've achieved some external marker of success. I'm proud of you because you had the courage to tell the truth, because you set a boundary that was hard to set, because you chose yourself, and in doing so, you actually helped our whole family become healthier." I felt tears on my cheeks. "I'm proud of you too, Mom," I said, "for doing your own work, for being willing to change." A year after that dinner where I asked, "Who's been paying your bills?" everything had stabilized into a new normal. My parents were living within their means. It was a different life than they'd expected, but it was sustainable. My father had started volunteering at a community center, teaching orthopedics basics to students. My mother had gone back to therapy as a practice, taking clients 2 days a week at a reduced rate, They'd found purpose that wasn't dependent on maintaining an image. I was dating someone named Michael, who was kind and present and didn't expect me to save him financially. We'd been together for 6 months, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I could be in a relationship without it coming at the expense of my own well-being. Jason and I had become close again. We had dinner together every 2 weeks, and we actually talked about things that mattered. He'd opened up about his own struggles, about the pressure he felt to be the successful one, about how much he resented the golden child label, about how grateful he was to me for breaking the family pattern of silence. At work, I'd gotten a promotion. I was now the executive director of Community Bridges. It was a significant increase in responsibility and, importantly, in salary. With this new income, I could actually save. I could plan for the future. I could breathe. One day, I was having lunch with my therapist. Yes, we'd graduated to having therapy lunches, which is a weird kind of boundary, but also kind of beautiful. "I want to check in," Dr. Chen said, "about how you're feeling about your relationship with your parents now." "I feel like I've gotten my life back," I said. "It's not that I've forgiven everything, but I've moved from a place of resentment to a place of understanding, and that's made a huge difference." "What shifted?" she asked. "I think it was realizing that my parents were trapped in their own patterns, just like I was trapped in mine. They were raised to believe that image and status and external success were the most important things. So when they couldn't maintain that image anymore, they couldn't face it. They had to have someone else carry that burden for them. And I let them because I'd been raised to believe that my worth was determined by how useful I was to other people." "And what do you believe now?" "I believe that my worth is inherent," I said. "It's not dependent on my job or my relationship status or how much money I make or whether I'm helping my parents financially. I'm worthy simply because I exist." "That's good," Dr. Chen said. "That's real growth." Chapter 19, The Speaking Engagement. A year and a half after that pivotal dinner, I was invited to speak at a conference about nonprofit leadership and personal financial boundaries. The woman who'd invited me was named Patricia, and she'd read an article I'd written for a nonprofit trade publication about the intersection of personal financial health and nonprofit work. "Your writing resonates," Patricia said when she called. "There's something authentic about it. I have a feeling you have a personal story." I did tell her my story. Not the whole thing. The financial details about my parents would have seemed too personal to share with a stranger. But I told her about learning to set boundaries, about the intersection of self-care and serving others, about how you can't pour from an empty cup, no matter how much you want to. Patricia asked if I'd be willing to speak about this at a conference for nonprofit professionals. At first, I said no. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not comfortable being in front of large groups. I have anxiety about being judged. But then I thought about all the people who might be in that audience who were in situations similar to mine. People who were silently sacrificing their own well-being for the people they served or the people they loved. People who needed to hear that it was okay to take care of themselves. So I said yes. The speech was terrifying. I stood backstage, my hands shaking, my heart racing. I almost backed out. But then I thought about my younger self, the one who was sitting at her desk every day feeling like she was suffocating, and I walked out onto that stage. "I want to talk to you about something that's not often discussed in nonprofit circles," I began. "I want to talk about the ways that nonprofit workers often sacrifice their own financial health in service of others. And I want to suggest that this is not only harmful to us, but actually harmful to the work we're trying to do." I told them about my parents. I didn't name them or give identifying details, But I told them the story of being trapped in a situation where I was funding someone else's lifestyle while I myself was struggling. I talked about the resentment that had built up, about the burnout, about the realization that I wasn't actually helping my parents by enabling their behavior. We have a tendency in nonprofits to believe that sacrifice is noble, I said, that we should give until it hurts, that if we're not at the point of burnout, we're not trying hard enough. And I'm here to tell you that that's a lie. Your own financial health is not selfish. Taking care of yourself is not a betrayal of your mission. In fact, I would argue that your ability to do good work depends entirely on your own stability. I talked about setting boundaries, about learning to say no, about the guilt that comes with prioritizing yourself. The guilt is a trap, I said. It's the thing that keeps us small. It's the thing that keeps us from being as effective as we could be. And if we can move through that guilt, if we can understand that taking care of ourselves is actually taking care of our mission, everything changes. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then the room erupted in applause. People came up to me afterward and told me their own stories. Women who were supporting family members while working in nonprofits. People who were struggling with the guilt of having enough when their clients had so little. People who were desperate for permission to take care of themselves. I gave them that permission, over and over again. Chapter 20, the article. The speech led to an article in a major nonprofit publication. They wanted me to write about the intersection of personal financial health and nonprofit work. They wanted me to go deeper into my story. I wrote a piece called "The Cost of Caring: Why Personal Boundaries Are Professional Necessity." In it, I talked about my situation. I was more open than I'd been in the speech. I named the guilt. I named the resentment. I named the specific numbers of how much I'd been sending my parents and for how long. When the article came out, it went viral in nonprofit circles. People shared it. They commented on it. Some people reached out to tell me their own stories. One email particularly stood out. It was from a woman named Linda who worked at a homeless shelter in Ohio. "I've been reading your article over and over," she wrote, "because I'm in almost exactly the same situation. I'm sending money to my mother every month, money I can't afford to send. And I can't stop because I'm terrified of what will happen if I do. Reading your story has made me realize that I have to do something different. So I'm asking you, how do I get out of this? How do I say no to my mother?" I responded to Linda's email with a long message about my journey, about therapy, about learning to set boundaries, about the guilt that comes afterward, about the realization that you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. We started corresponding regularly. I became, in some small way, a mentor to her, and she became a reminder to me of where I'd been, that place of desperation and guilt and feeling trapped. 2 years after that dinner, I was a completely different person. I wasn't the same person who'd been silently bankrolling her parents' lifestyle while hatting herself for it. I wasn't the same person who'd believed her worth was determined by how useful she was to other people. I was someone who'd learned that boundaries were necessary, that saying no wasn't selfish, that taking care of yourself was actually the foundation for being able to take care of others. In terms of the tangible things, I had a promotion. I had a relationship with someone I genuinely cared about. I had taken 3 vacations. I had decorated my apartment. I had friendships that were actually nourished instead of ignored. I had a life. But the bigger transformation was internal. I'd moved from a place of resentment to a place of understanding. I'd moved from guilt to clarity. I'd moved from feeling trapped to feeling free. My relationship with my parents had evolved too. We had a healthy dynamic now. They respected my boundaries. I respected their journey. We weren't a perfect family, but we were honest. One Sunday, I had dinner with them at their condo. My mother had made a simple meal, nothing elaborate. We sat around their small dining table and we actually talked about my work, about their lives, about the changes that had happened. "I've been thinking a lot about this past couple of years," my mother said, "about how much has changed, about how different everything is." "Is it better?" I asked. "Yes," my mother said without hesitation. "It's better. We're still struggling financially, but we're struggling authentically now. We're not pretending, and that's actually a relief." "I used to think that struggle meant failure," my father added. "But I've learned that struggle is just part of being human. The failure is in pretending you're not struggling when you are." Chapter 22. The Conference Circuit. The speaking engagements kept coming. After that first conference, I was invited to speak at others. Universities, nonprofit conferences, women's leadership conferences, places where people wanted to hear about boundaries and financial health and the intersection of personal care and professional excellence. I started refining my talk. I created slides. I developed a framework for thinking about boundaries. I talked about the guilt that comes with prioritizing yourself and how to move through it. The consistent theme in every audience was the same. People were hungry for permission to take care of themselves. People were struggling under the weight of taking care of others. People needed to know that it was okay to say no. I started getting asked if I wanted to write a book. Several people mentioned it. A publisher reached out. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in writing a book about nonprofit leadership and personal financial boundaries. I was hesitant at first. I'm a nonprofit professional, not a writer. I'm someone who wrote an article that happened to resonate. I'm not someone who writes books. But Michael, my boyfriend, encouraged me to think about it. "You have something important to say," he told me, "and people want to hear it. Why not give them the chance?" So I started writing. I wrote about my parents. I wrote about the years of silence. I wrote about the moment at the dinner table when everything changed. I wrote about the aftermath and the healing. I wrote about the framework for setting boundaries. I wrote about the guilt that comes with prioritizing yourself. I wrote about the ways that nonprofit workers are socialized to sacrifice their own well-being. The book was called "Who's Paying the Bill? Setting Boundaries in a World That Demands Sacrifice." It came out 2 years after that dinner. It wasn't a bestseller, but it became something of a cult classic in nonprofit circles. It was assigned in classes. It was recommended by therapists and coaches. People told me that it had changed their lives, that they'd read it and finally had the courage to have difficult conversations with the people they loved, that they'd read it and finally started prioritizing their own well-being. Chapter 23. The Unexpected Outcome. 3 years after that dinner, something unexpected happened. My mother called me with an opportunity. "I want to tell you about something," she said. "Your father and I have been talking, and we want to invest in community bridges." I was confused. "Invest how?" "Financially. We have a small amount of money saved, money that we could use to help your organization. It's not a loan. It's an investment in the work you're doing. It's what we should have been doing all along instead of asking you for help." I was stunned into silence. "We've been talking to a financial advisor," my mother continued, "about how to use what little we have in ways that actually matter. And what matters to us is the work you're doing, helping people who are struggling, creating housing for people who don't have homes. That's actual impact." My father got on the phone. "We're not rich," he said. "We're not going to be able to fund an entire program, but we can make a significant donation. And we want you to use it in a way that serves people, not in a way that creates a building with our name on it or anything like that. We just want to help." I cried after that conversation. Not tears of resentment or guilt, but tears of something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding that my parents had actually changed. That they'd actually learned. That they were now trying to use their resources in a way that actually helped people instead of just maintaining an image. I accepted their donation, and I used it to create a program called the Rivers Housing Initiative. Not named after my family, but named after the metaphor of flowing water, of things moving and changing and not staying trapped in place. Chapter 24, Jason's Growth. Jason had been transformed by this process too. He'd left his job in finance and started his own coaching business, focused on helping high-income professionals navigate their own values and life choices. He was helping people figure out what they actually wanted instead of what they thought they were supposed to want. I realized, he told me during one of our regular dinners, that I'd been living someone else's life, that I'd been trying to be the person my parents wanted me to be instead of the person I actually was. Your willingness to challenge that, your willingness to say no and set boundaries, it gave me permission to do the same. Are you happier? I asked. So much happier, he said. I make less money, I have less status, but I actually like the life I'm living now. I like being present with my kids. I like doing work that matters to me instead of work that just looks impressive. Chapter 25, 5 years later. 5 years after that dinner, I was sitting in my office at Community Bridges, the office I'd been promoted to, the place where I'd become executive director, and I was looking at the numbers. We'd helped over 5,000 people find permanent housing. We'd trained hundreds of nonprofit professionals on boundary setting and personal financial health. My book had sold over 50,000 copies. I'd spoken at conferences and universities across the country. The work was having real impact. But more importantly, my life was good. I was engaged to Michael. We were talking about getting married. We talked about having kids, though we weren't sure if we wanted them. We were planning a future together. I had friendships that were deep and real. I had a relationship with my brother that was actually close. I had a relationship with my parents that was healthy and grounded in honesty. I'd gone to therapy for 5 years and graduated from it. I no longer felt trapped by resentment. I no longer believed that my worth was determined by my usefulness to other people. Most importantly, I was no longer silently bankrolling my parents' lifestyle. But the irony was that they were now actually helping the work I did, helping the people who were struggling the way we'd all been struggling. My therapist, Dr. Chen, had a different job now too. I saw her once a month for supervision and guidance, rather than for therapy. She'd become more of a mentor than a therapist, and I'd become more of a colleague than a client. I want to ask you something, she said during one of our sessions. Looking back at everything that happened, at that dinner, at the confrontation, at all of it, would you do it differently? I thought about that carefully. I would have set boundaries earlier, I said. I would have been more honest with the people around me about what was happening. I would have stopped sending money years before I actually did. But I don't know if I could have done those things before I did them. I think I had to arrive at those realizations on my own timeline. And now I'm grateful, not for what happened. The situation was toxic and I wish it had never happened. But I'm grateful for what I learned from it. I learned that I'm capable of setting boundaries. I learned that I can survive the guilt that comes with prioritizing myself. I learned that my worth is inherent, not conditional. And I learned that being honest, even when it's uncomfortable, is the foundation for real connection. Chapter 26, The Dinner Revisited. My parents invited me to dinner on the 5-year anniversary of that dinner, where everything had changed. I was nervous about it. I don't know why. 5 years had passed. Everything was different. but there was something about revisiting that scene that felt emotionally significant. I drove to their condo on a Sunday afternoon. It was summer, and the trees were all in full leaf. It felt like a different season than that autumn dinner that had changed everything. My parents were waiting for me. They looked older than they had 5 years ago, but they also looked peaceful in a way they hadn't before. "Hello, sweetheart," my mother said, hugging me at the door. "Thank you for coming." I was nervous, I admitted, about revisiting that dinner. "I was too," my mother said, "but I think it's important. I think we need to remember where we were and celebrate where we are." We sat down to eat. My mother had made pot roast again, the same dish that had been on the table 5 years ago. But this time it felt different. It felt like remembrance instead of performance. "I want to start by saying thank you," my father said. "Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth that night. Thank you for setting a boundary that was hard to set. And thank you for not abandoning us even after we'd behaved so badly." "I did abandon you," I said. "I stopped sending money, I stepped back." "You set a boundary," my mother corrected. "That's not abandonment, that's health. And yes, it was painful, but it was the most important thing that could have happened." My father nodded. "If you'd kept sending money, we never would have had to face our actual situation. We never would have had to make real changes. We'd still be in denial. We'd still be asking you to carry our burden for us." "Instead," my mother said, "we had to grow up. We had to be adults and take responsibility for our own lives. And you know what? It's been good." "It's been hard," my father added, "but it's been good." I felt tears on my cheeks. "I was angry with you for so long," I said. "So angry." "You had every right to be," my mother said. "You still do if you need to be. Healing isn't linear. Some days you might feel angry again." "I don't think I do," I said. "I don't think I'm angry anymore. I'm sad about what happened. I'm sorry about the years we lost to that dynamic, but I'm not angry." My father reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because you succeeded or because you accomplished something external. I'm proud of you because you loved yourself enough to set a boundary, because you chose yourself. That's the thing that actually matters." My parents had written me a letter. They asked if I'd be willing to read it after dinner. I opened it after we'd cleared the table, and were sitting in their living room with tea. It was written in my mother's handwriting. "Dear Sarah, 5 years ago, I called you a failure. I told you that you were wasting your potential. I said these things to hurt you, though I didn't realize that at the time. I thought I was being honest. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was being a good mother by pushing you toward what I believed you should be achieving. I was wrong about all of it. What I was actually doing was projecting my own shame onto you. I was afraid because your father and I were failing, financially, emotionally, in terms of taking care of ourselves. And instead of facing that failure, I tried to make you feel like your failure was the problem. I tried to redirect the focus away from our situation and onto your situation. That was cruel, and I'm sorry. What I've learned in the past 5 years is that failure is not shameful. Struggle is not shameful. Being human is not shameful. What is shameful is refusing to face your own humanity. What is shameful is trying to make someone else carry the burden of your avoidance. I'm sorry for making you carry that burden. I'm sorry for the 12 years of silent resentment you endured. I'm sorry for the ways I made you feel small and worthless. I'm sorry for calling you a failure when you were the strongest person in our family. I'm also grateful. Grateful that you had the courage to say no. Grateful that you set a boundary. Grateful that you forced us to face ourselves. Grateful that you loved yourself enough to choose yourself. You are not a failure. You never were. You are one of the most successful people I know, Not because of what you've accomplished professionally, though that's impressive, but because you've built a life of integrity. You've done work that matters. You've developed relationships that are real. You've figured out how to love yourself and other people without losing yourself in the process. That is actual success. That is what I should have been teaching you how to do all along, instead of trying to fit you into the box of my own expectations. I love you, not conditionally, not based on your accomplishments or your life choices, just because you are you. Mom. I finished reading the letter and I was crying. Real tears, good tears. Thank you, I said, for writing this, for meaning it. We meant every word, my father said, and we'll probably have to mean it again. We'll probably forget sometimes. You'll probably hear judgment in our voices even when we don't mean to be judgmental. This isn't a perfect ending, but it's a real one, and that's better. Chapter 28. Looking back, looking forward. A few months after that dinner, I was interviewed by a podcast called The Boundary Setters. The host, a woman named Karen, asked me to tell the story of what had happened. I told her everything, the 12 years of silence, the resentment that had built up, the dinner where I'd asked, "Who's been paying your bills?" The confrontation, the aftermath, the reconciliation. "Do you have any regrets?" Karen asked. "I regret the years of silence," I said. "I regret not being honest with the people I loved about what was happening. I regret believing that my worth was determined by my usefulness. But I don't regret the confrontation. I don't regret setting the boundary. I don't regret choosing myself." "What would you tell someone who's in a similar situation right now?" Karen asked. "I would tell them that it's okay to say no. I would tell them that setting a boundary doesn't make them selfish or ungrateful. I would tell them that they deserve to have a life that's their own. I would tell them that the guilt they feel is not evidence that they're doing something wrong. It's often evidence that they're finally doing something right." "And would you tell them that everything will work out, that their family will change and relationships will heal?" "No," I said honestly. "I wouldn't promise that. Some families don't heal. Some parents don't change. Some relationships don't survive the confrontation. But I would tell them that healing themselves, setting the boundary and prioritizing their own well-being is worth it regardless of what happens with their family. I would tell them that you can build a good life even if your family doesn't support it. I would tell them that you're allowed to choose yourself, and that choice alone is powerful." The biggest thing I've learned from all of this, the thing that I wish I'd known when I was 26 years old, sitting at my parents' dining room table, being asked to help with just $500 a month, is this: love and boundaries are not opposed. They go together. True love for your family includes setting boundaries. True love for yourself includes saying no. True love includes being honest, even when it's uncomfortable. For years, I thought that loving my parents meant sacrificing my own well-being. I thought that being a good daughter meant doing whatever I could to help them, regardless of the cost to myself. I thought that refusing to help them meant I didn't love them. What I've learned is that none of that is true. I love my parents more now, when I have boundaries, than I did when I was silently resentful and bankrolling their lifestyle. I'm a better daughter to them when I'm taking care of myself. I'm a better sister to Jason when I'm not drowning in guilt and resentment. I'm a better person to everyone in my life when I'm honoring my own needs. Setting the boundary didn't destroy my relationship with my parents. It actually saved it, because the relationship that existed before, the one where I was silently resentful and they were blindly taking advantage of me, wasn't a real relationship. It was a transaction masquerading as love. The relationship we have now, grounded in honesty and mutual respect and clear boundaries, is actually real. If you're reading this, and you're silently bankrolling someone else's lifestyle while your own life shrinks, I want you to know something. You don't have to do this. You don't have to sacrifice your own well-being for someone else's comfort. You don't have to feel guilty for wanting to take care of yourself. You don't have to be useful in order to be worthy of love. The guilt you're feeling right now, the guilt that's keeping you trapped in this situation, is not evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's often evidence that you're finally doing something right, that you're finally choosing yourself, that you're finally breaking a pattern. It's okay if people are angry when you set a boundary. It's okay if people tell you that you're selfish or ungrateful or disloyal. It's okay if relationships change or end because you prioritize yourself. That's not a failure. That's you becoming a person of integrity. The thing about my parents is that they didn't change immediately. It took months for them to understand what had happened. It took longer for them to take responsibility. It took even longer for them to do their own work and genuinely change. But they did change, and the relationship we have now is better than it was before. That might not be what happens with your family. Your family might not be willing to do the work. Your family might blame you forever for setting that boundary. Your family might choose to maintain the old dynamic and exclude you from their lives. And if that happens, I'm not going to lie to you, it will hurt. It will hurt a lot. But here's what I know, you will survive it. You will build a life that's good. You will find people who respect your boundaries and value your well-being. You will find a way to be happy even without your family's approval. The guilt is lying to you. The guilt is telling you that you're selfish. The guilt is telling you that you don't deserve to have a life of your own. Don't listen to it. You deserve to have a life that's yours. You deserve to say no. You deserve to prioritize yourself. And the people who truly love you, the people who are worth keeping in your life, will eventually respect that boundary. They might not like it at first. They might resist it. But eventually, if they're capable of growth, they'll understand. Set the boundary. Choose yourself. And know that on the other side of that choice is freedom.